Yeah, Anne-Marie, it is Friday, and what a Friday it is shaping up to be. Chaos, clashes, protests, they've all intensified in Minneapolis, where activists are demanding justice for George Floyd. He is the black man who died after being arrested by police. New video shows Minnesota State Police and the National Guard lining the streets this morning, and this all comes after protesters rallied for a third day in a row. Anger over Floyd's death, police brutality, and racism have fueled the unrest. The police station where the officer who arrested Floyd worked was torched, while other businesses were vandalized and looted. Minneapolis wasn't the only city to erupt yesterday. Protests were held across the country in New York, Colorado, Arizona, Ohio, all growing calls for charges to be filed against the 4 officers involved in Floyd's arrest. President Trump weighed in on the situation, slamming the radical left and the mayor of Minneapolis. Twitter flagged a separate tweet by the President of the United States that it said glorified violence after he called protesters thugs and appeared to threaten military action. The White House still then shared the message. However, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey fired back.
The symbolism of a building cannot outweigh the importance of life, of our officers or the public. Weakness is refusing to take responsibility for your own actions. Weakness is pointing your finger at somebody else during a time of crisis. Donald Trump knows nothing about the strength of Minneapolis. We are strong as hell. Is this a difficult time period? Yes, but you better be damn sure that we're gonna get through this.
And of course, this all comes as the FBI continues to ramp up its investigation into Floyd's death. Many of you all have seen the video of the white police officer with his knee on Floyd's neck for more than 5 minutes as Floyd pleaded that he could not breathe. So Jeff Pegues has been following all of this from Minneapolis, and he's joining us now. It was quite an eventful evening there in Minneapolis, Jeff, but what's the situation like today? Are more protests planned?
Well, I'm sure there'll be sporadic protests somewhere. That's what we've seen over the last couple of days. What I'm seeing here now is that firefighters are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because look behind me. You can see the smoke billowing into the sky over there. Over here, you have another building, and this was put out yesterday. It's starting to flare up again. You can probably see the flames through what's left of a window there. So firefighters are concerned about that. And then all the way down here, you see another contingent of firefighters dousing flames. So those demonstrators have left in their wake a lot of damage because, and you can't see it right now because those are utility crews, but beyond this line of state troopers is another set of firefighters. So there is a lot going on here right now, and as I said, it's the firefighters at this moment doing the heavy lifting.
Jeff, you had an opportunity to speak with a few small business owners in Minneapolis about the protests and the overall outrage. What have you been hearing, the reaction from members of the community? Clearly, people are outraged over the police brutality and the killing of Mr. Floyd.
Well, in terms of the business owners in this area, they're devastated. Some of them. We talked to a man yesterday who put his life savings into a sports bar that was about to open up, and he canceled his insurance a few weeks ago with the pandemic because obviously no business, so he was trying to save money, and now his business has been destroyed. There was looting there yesterday. In fact, we had video of 2 people in broad daylight trying to steal his safe. And so that is an example of someone, a business owner in this area, a relatively young guy, probably in his mid-30s, who had put his life savings into this sports bar, and now it's been destroyed. So you have a mix of emotions here. Obviously, a lot of people, millions of people, in fact, voicing their concerns about what happened to George Floyd. But you also have the situation here. I mean, this used to be a relatively vibrant business district, and look at it now. I've been here for several hours, but I'm still amazed by what I see because there's so many different levels of destruction here. You have a water main break that's ruptured over there. You have this burned out shell of a building. And now you have the state police here among a contingent of law enforcement that includes the National Guard trying to keep the peace.
Jeff, I don't know if you can speak to this, though, but in watching some of the coverage, a lot of what struck me was that when a lot of this destruction was taking place overnight, there were no police officers around. I mean, a police precinct sort of went up in flames, and you didn't see a lot of police officers. You didn't see firefighters. But I know that you know a lot about how emergency crews sort of manage situations like that. But why wouldn't you see more officers and firefighters out there when all of this is happening?
Because you don't want to put more lives in danger. That's what it comes down to. And that is the kind of tactic that we don't just see here. We've seen it in other cities and states when you have these kinds of clashes in community. You want to pull the police line back. You don't want to incite people to get more upset and frustrated. And so what they do is they deploy the police officers or state police to the perimeter of a situation. They have intelligence. And what I mean by that is they have undercover police officers, perhaps in the crowds, relaying information to the perimeter. And once things really heat up and you really need to shut things down, that's when you'll see the contingent of state police officers, perhaps in riot gear, moving in to help calm things down. And really, that's what we've seen here over the last 48 hours.
Jeff, let me ask you about the police officer that we see on video, at least the initial video that was released to the public, that a bystander took of Mr. Floyd being killed by this police officer, Derek Chauvin. Yesterday evening on the Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, you reported that he had 18 complaints filed against him. And I know that you've reported on police brutality across the country. I'm curious what more details you can provide on those incidences of Mr. or Police Officer Chauvin, and what kind of issues exist within the Minneapolis Police Department as a whole.
Well, as far as the officer at the center of this, he has had a history of complaints. I mean, 18 complaints, that's not run-of-the-mill. That's something that sort of gets your attention. But he was cleared in most of those cases. In 2 of them, he was reprimanded. But it is something that investigators will look at to see if there is a pattern there. And so there is a lot of evidence in this case, and I think a lot of people in this community know that. You have several different camera views of what was happening. You have the body camera video that the officers had on their chest. We haven't seen that yet, but that's out there too, and I'm assuming that prosecutors have seen it as they come to their decision whether to bring charges. So there is a lot there, and there is a lot in the history here between cops and the community. There have been several high-profile incidents over the years that have strained the relationship with the community here, and I think what you saw on Monday has brought things to a head, and that's why you see what you see behind me, or at least part of why you see what you see behind me. And so to your question, there is a history here, and you hear the frustration. We talked to a community activist yesterday. His name was, or is, Spike Moss. And he talked about, I asked him whether this was justified given the situation. And he said to me, listen, we are tired. We are tired in this community because of what has happened in the history of this community between the police force and primarily black residents. And so what you're seeing here, according to the people that we've talked to, this is all of that pent-up anger and frustration coming to a head.
So in regards to the investigation into these officers, what people want to see is charges being filed. And, one could understand that perhaps they're working on investigating whether the extent of the charges, whether we're talking about a murder charge or not. But in the interest of maybe even calming things down, surely there are some charges that could be filed against these officers as the investigation unfolds. Do we know what's going on with the investigation?
Yes, we know that investigators have told us that, they're trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And that's what you have to do in these cases. When you're looking at cases that involve police tactics, you really have to make sure that you have an airtight case. Why? Because if you look at the statistics, it is hard to get a conviction against a police officer. Even though in this case you have something caught on tape. There have been other cases where you've had an incident caught on tape, it's extremely frustrating, and still you have an acquittal. And so an acquittal could lead to more of this. And I think city officials in this area are aware of that. They are concerned about that. So you have to make sure, if you are an investigator, a prosecutor, that you do things right in cases like this. I get it. I understand that it is frustrating for the average citizen. They want action now. That's what they want to see. But the reality is, as an investigator, you know where the officers are right now. You know how to catch up to them. The question is, can you build a case? And even the prosecutors have acknowledged that that video is troubling. You have police officials across this country in prominent positions saying, that's not the way we should be doing our jobs. And in fact, I've done a lot of work on this issue since Ferguson. And police departments and police leadership went to great pains to try to reform some of the tactics being used. And what you see in that tape is not something that, at least publicly, when they talk to people like me in the media, they will acknowledge happens or should be happening. And so when you see that video, it is disturbing. However, you have to build a case, especially in situations like this, given the statistics, how hard it is to actually indict or even arrest a police officer.
Jeff, before we let you go, you're talking about the outrage that people in the community are displaying because there have been no arrests made of these police officers who took the life of Mr. Floyd. And yet this morning, as you know, CNN reporter Omar Jimenez and his crew were arrested on live TV. And that's, for a lot of people, shows. I watched that video, Jeff, and I know you are in the area where Omar was as well. And I watched this young man being arrested by police with dozens of police officers and state troopers armed to the teeth standing behind him. And I watched him remain calm and collected as those handcuffs were slapped on him. And so I just wonder about. And then you've got the president of the United States tweeting about looting and shooting, which is in apparent reference to a police chief in Miami back in 1967 who used exactly the same language. When people talk to you about the situation on the ground, when a journalist who's doing his job is arrested, when he's on live television, and men who, by accounts of that video, look to have murdered another human being, and nothing so far has happened, just help me understand that.
Well, law enforcement moved in today. As I discussed when Anne Marie asked her question, they were on the perimeter, and it happened fairly quickly. And they were moving everybody back. And I guess perhaps they didn't have a conversation about the media and how we are typically given access to locations like this that the general public doesn't typically get in situations like this. But in this case, you're right. They swept up that CNN crew. They were arrested. In fact, what I found is interesting is that one of Omar's CNN colleagues was saying that he didn't get arrested, and he was there too, and he happens to be white. So I thought that was really interesting about that situation. But we were in that vicinity at the time, and they were firing tear gas in our direction. So it was a chaotic situation this morning as law enforcement moved in to try to get the crowds to disperse. It's not a pretty thing. It's not an easy thing to do. And this morning it looked like, and it did happen, members of the media were caught up in that.
All right, Jeff, thanks a lot. Thanks for your reporting, and stay safe, okay?
Thank you.